London, 1953. On June the 2nd, the royal coach left Buckingham Palace at 10:26 a.m. The young woman sitting inside was just 27. Queen Elizabeth II of England was on her way to Westminster Abbey for her coronation. This colossal celebration became a day for the ages, not only for the nation, but also for the early history of television. For the first time ever, over 100 million people across Great Britain, Europe and North America were able to watch the pageantry in London on television. In 1953, that was nothing short of a sensation. Cameras stood everywhere. What did all this media attention mean to young Queen Elizabeth, to the royal family, to the British government? And why did television play such a role in the coronation when the young Queen's advisors, particularly Prime Minister Winston Churchill, were very much against it? After all, just 8 years had passed since the end of World War II. It would seem inappropriate to spend so much on a sumptuous royal event. Let's begin looking for answers near Westminster, several days before the coronation. The streets were lined with curious spectators and press representatives, all eager to catch a glimpse of such esteemed guests as the Archbishop of Canterbury, or Viscount Simons wearing his Lord Chancellor wig, or the Duchess of Norfolk. All had come to rehearse their roles for the live broadcast on Coronation Day. Some rehearsed in full ceremonial attire. The dress rehearsals were filmed so the camera operators could also practice their roles. The only main actor missing was the Queen. Instead, the Duchess of Norfolk had the honor of standing in for her. Across from the Queen's stand-in, the Archbishop of Canterbury was preparing for the most crucial moment of the whole ceremony, placing the crown on the Queen's head. During the 1937 coronation of Elizabeth's father, George VI, there had been some rather awkward confusion. Back then, a camera filmed the Archbishop lifting the crown from its cushion and turning it multiple times, clearly confused about which side was to face forward, before placing it on the King's head. The footage would later be cut from newsreel reports, but the Queen's ceremony was to be broadcast live, with millions of viewers able to catch even the slightest mistake. Rehearsals for the Queen's grand entrance into what's known as the Theatre of Westminster Abbey, the elevated, carpeted area where over 2 hours of ceremony would take place. On the left, bleachers were set up, the same above and behind the throne. More than 8,000 guests were to attend the coronation. The orchestra and choir were seated further back to the right. They too were getting ready for the big day. During the technical rehearsal, this area is filled with sound, lighting and camera professionals. Precautions were taken. The coronation chair, for example, was a replica of the 700-year-old original that was not to be put in place until the last moment. A technician measured lighting conditions to ensure the Queen was well lit when filmed sitting in the coronation chair. Over 20 cameras were installed around the theatre and at the western entrance to the Abbey. Their exact placement was a tricky balance between finding the right angle for excellent shots while keeping equipment and operators out of sight. To do this, some were hidden behind the decor, while others were draped in heavy black velour. Outside, there were other problems to address. Along the royal coach's 4-kilometre route from Buckingham Palace to Westminster Abbey and its planned 8-kilometre return, some 50 camera operators would be jostling for the best spot. Most positioned themselves around the palace, the Abbey, or at Charing Cross. The ceremony was organised by 2 men. Public Works Minister David Eccles, seen here showing the cameras his great interest in the bleacher constructions, and the Duke of Norfolk. Since the 14th century, the Dukes of Norfolk have organised all the English Crown's royal ceremonies. Filming representatives of the British Crown and government at work was by no means incidental. The British public needed reassurance. From preparing Westminster Abbey to decorating the streets, a change of monarchs is always a costly affair. Take this monogram, for example. E2R stands for Elizabeth II Regina. British mailboxes at the time were still emblazoned with G6R, the monogram for her father, King George VI. Each mailbox, postage stamp and uniform now had to be inscribed with E2R instead. With news reports like this, organisers wanted to assure the public that the sale of consumer products associated with the coronation would help offset the cost. Along the parade routes, choice seats were sold at high prices. Lucky owners could listen to the ceremony taking place in Westminster Abbey via loudspeaker. June 2, 1953, the day of the coronation. As of dawn, some 2 to 3 million people had started gathering to catch a glimpse of Her Majesty in the royal coach. The press had announced that the entire parade route would be televised. But in 1953, televisions were not common in British households. Besides, it was traditional to witness such momentous events in person. Spectators came well prepared. Periscopes offered a great view to those using them, but blocked the view for anyone behind. An alternative was a simple mirror mounted on a pole, but that meant having to turn your back on the very event you had come to see. Inside the royal carriage, the young Queen was accompanied by her husband, Prince Philip, but only Elizabeth was to be crowned. Meanwhile, guests in the Royal Gallery in Westminster Abbey were patiently awaiting the Queen. It had taken hours for all the royal guests to be seated. The camera operators had arrived even earlier. They passed the time with filming. In the first row seat, the Queen's immediate family. Her mother, Elizabeth, known as the Queen Mother. To the left, the Queen's aunt, Royal Princess Mary. On the other side of the Queen Mother was Elizabeth's sister, Princess Margaret. In the second row, Elizabeth's mother-in-law, Princess Alice of Greece, wearing the habit of the Greek Orthodox order she founded. Her son, Prince Philip of Edinburgh, had converted to the Anglican Church in order to marry his distant cousin, Elizabeth II. The Queen is welcomed by a Latin Lord, or hymn of praise, a tradition dating back 900 years to William the Conqueror. It was Elizabeth herself who had chosen to televise her proper coronation. A daring decision. Television was a new medium, and technical errors still occurred frequently. Simultaneously broadcasting live images in multiple countries was no small feat. Elizabeth's first major experience dealing with the media took place in 1947 on a long journey with her parents to South Africa. The trip was officially organized to allow the ailing King George VI to rest. Neither Elizabeth, sitting next to her father, nor her younger sister Margaret had ever visited the Empire. Reporters covering the royal family's crossing captured a light-hearted young princess. Elizabeth turned 21 during the trip. After visiting South Africa, no longer a minor, she made an official statement of her willingness to eventually succeed her father.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong. But I shall not have strength to carry out this resolution alone unless you join in it with me, as I now invite you to do.
The BBC broadcast Princess Elizabeth's declaration throughout the British Commonwealth, which had been under immense stress since the end of World War II, especially in Southeast Asia. Only 4 months later, in August 1947, India would be divided into two countries that would each attain their independence: the mostly Hindu India and Muslim Pakistan. Shortly after, in January 1948, Burma, today's Myanmar, declared its independence. In a few short months, the empire had lost over 400 million subjects. Amidst such upheaval, Elizabeth's declaration reassured an undoubtedly worried nation. By the time the royal family had returned to London on May the 11th, 1947, Elizabeth was ready to assume her father's royal occupations. She would succeed him at his death in 1952. By June 2, 1953, Elizabeth had already been queen for over a year. In a tradition dating back almost 10 centuries, the coronation proceeded in 6 stages. It began with the recognition.
Queen Elizabeth, your undoubted queen.
The Queen turned in all 4 directions so that those seated could loudly proclaim they recognized her as sovereign. Next followed the oath. The young sovereign swore to govern the United Kingdom and its territories by respecting their laws and customs.
I solemnly promise so to do.
Third came a religious rite called the anointing. In a sign of humility, the Queen put on a plain white dress and receives several drops of sacred oil. Out of respect for the spirituality of this ritual, cameras were not allowed to film this part of the ceremony. Instead, the anointment took place under a golden canopy, out of public sight. Fourth stage was the investiture. Having received the royal emblems, Elizabeth was crowned by the Archbishop of Canterbury. Then homage was paid. The royal peers, including Elizabeth's husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, filed before the Queen to swear their fealty.
I, Philip, will become your liege man of life and limb. The
ceremony concluded with the Anglican service of Holy Communion. Images of this religious ritual were filmed, but not shown on public television. Looking back to the second stage, the oath, a symbolic novelty was performed for Queen Elizabeth's coronation. For the first time, the priest handing the Bible to the regent, ceremoniously proposing the monarch be inspired by the sacred texts during her reign, was not an Anglican priest, but a Presbyterian one. Reverend Pitt Watson was chosen to ease tensions in Scotland. These tensions had arisen over the traditional coronation chair, which had been in service for the last 700 years. A block of sandstone, known as the Stone of Skun, or the Stone of Destiny, rests under the wooden seat, a sacred relic from Scotland, traditionally used at coronations. In the 13th century, the English had seized the stone from Scotland. It remained in England until Christmas of 1950, when the stone vanished overnight. Britain was in uproar. France, on the other hand, was less impressed.
Catastrophe nationale en Angleterre où la pierre du destin qui servait de coussin au fauteuil du couronnement depuis 700 ans a mystérieusement disparu. En dépit de la mobilisation totale des limiers de Scotland Yard, le précieux caillou demeure introuvable. Les dragages de la rivière de Hyde Park n'ont pas résolu le mystère, et la pierre étant connue pour ses sentiments nationalistes écossais, on se demande si elle n'est pas plutôt au fond du Loch Ness.
Stolen by young Scottish activists, the celebrated stone was recovered several months after its disappearance. England agreed to return the Stone of Destiny to Scotland, provided it be lent back for future coronations. If you look to the left, you can spot several well-hidden cameras. Not only did they film the ceremony, but also other memorable moments that unfolded around it. Like the Queen Mother with her grandson Charles. Or Prime Minister Winston Churchill. The Queen had just named him Knight of the Garter, England's most notable chivalric order. Churchill had donned his new ceremonial robes especially for the occasion. Foreign guests included the son of Japanese Emperor Hirohito. Standing in front of him, Yakov Malik, the Soviet ambassador to Great Britain at the time, despite the Cold War. But while a Soviet representative was present, the Vatican was not. The Pope's representative remained outside Westminster Abbey. Being a Roman Catholic, he was not allowed to attend an Anglican communion service. He would miss the ceremony's most awaited moment, the coronation. Thanks to careful rehearsals, the crown was positioned correctly this time. After the Queen was crowned, the peers followed suit. The Queen's uncle, the Duke of Gloucester, seemed hesitant, looking towards the Duke of Edinburgh to make sure the right moment had come. Weighing nearly 2.5 kilograms, this crown was so heavy that in 1837, Queen Victoria had chosen to wear a smaller one. 12:30 in the afternoon. Lunchtime in Paris, where this footage was shot. People poured into the streets where many shops had installed televisions in their front windows. In 1953, there were only 60,000 televisions in France and only 3 million in all of Europe. This was the first time Eurovision had broadcast live television footage in 5 countries: England, France, West Germany, Belgium, and Holland. Even though the image quality was poor, viewers were eager to watch. At around the same time, a plane from the Royal Air Force took off from London. It was carrying several copies of filmed footage to Canada. At Goose Bay, the cargo was transferred to a Canadian fighter jet and flown to Montreal. There, the images were broadcast across Canada, only 11 hours after they had been captured. Back at Goose Bay, 2 more jets began their race to Boston. The stations NBC and CBS had both secured footage and wanted to be the first to broadcast it. NBC's plane experienced delays and was running late, so the station resorted to Canadian material instead. With that, they beat their competitors at CBS. In total, some 80 million North Americans watched the coronation. In Westminster, the ceremonies were coming to an end. Before leaving the theatre to take her place in the royal coach, Queen Elizabeth II changed crowns. Weighing 900 grams, it was lighter, but still unwieldy for descending stairs. The guests of honour head for the Abbey door one by one. The Prime Ministers of Commonwealth nations. Protocol had it that they'd exit by order of importance. The Prime Minister of Ceylon. Then those of India and Pakistan, followed by New Zealand and South Africa. Next, Canada and Australia. Finally, and most importantly, Great Britain's Prime Minister. Winston Churchill appeared exhausted and suffered a stroke just days later. The return journey to Buckingham Palace followed a different route than the one taken by George VI in 1937. But it lasted just as long. Elizabeth's father had found the royal coach so uncomfortable that he had tyres added to the carriage wheels. The coach of the young Queen and her husband, here passing along Whitehall Avenue, was somewhat more modern. But some things don't change. In June 1902, the returning passage of newly crowned King Edward VII was filmed on the very same street, with the same number of horses, same dress uniforms for the horsemen, and the same carriage, save the tyres. There were bleachers to the left of the building. In 1902, seats were sold along the parade route. In 1953, the Queen returned to a Buckingham Palace that even had cameras installed on the rooftops. "100 million spectators watched Queen Elizabeth II's televised coronation. Some newsreel images such as these were shown in movie theatres all over the world. Then followed the crowning reveal. 2 competing production companies were creating documentary films about the day's events in colour. In less than a week, the films would be edited, distributed, and viewed in London, Paris, and New York cinemas. One of the films, The Queen is Crowned, a British Technicolor documentary on the ceremony, was even nominated for an Oscar. When deciding to allow television to film her coronation, Elizabeth II probably hadn't figured on such competition in the media. But in the end, commercial rivalry and emerging technological prowess bolstered the image of the young Queen of England and of the United Kingdom.